The stars looked different when Commander Hayek watched them from the bridge of his warship. For 200 years, the Velkari Empire had moved across space like a great wave, washing over 17 different worlds and making them all the same. Each conquest followed the same pattern. Arrive with overwhelming force, demand surrender, wait for the inevitable submission, then add another species to their growing collection of servants. Today would be no different, or so Hayek believed as. He studied the readings from the third planet of this small yellow star. The inhabitants called their world Earth and themselves humans. They had barely reached their own moon with primitive chemical rockets. Their weapons were crude metal projectiles fired by chemical explosions. They fought endless wars among themselves, over patches of dirt and ideological differences that made no sense to civilized minds. The intelligence reports painted a picture of a chaotic species that could not even achieve basic planetary unity. Hundreds of different nations squabbled like children over resources that could be easily shared. They poisoned their own atmosphere while arguing about whether this was actually happening. Some groups still believed invisible beings controlled their destiny from some other dimension. It would almost be merciful to bring them under Velkari rule and end their self-destructive behavior. Hayek touched the communication panel with one of his forearms and opened a channel to the Velkari Supreme. Command. This is Battlefleet 7 requesting final authorization for Operation Harvest Moon. Target species shows no signs of advanced defense capabilities. Estimated conquest time is 48 hours. The response came back within moments. Authorization. Granted, Commander Hayek. Standard protocol applies. Offer surrender terms first, then proceed with subjugation if refused. The Empire expects this to be resolved quickly. Meanwhile, 300,000 kilometers away on Luna Station, Captain Daeho Kim was having what humans would call a very bad day. The massive sensor array that monitored deep space had been picking up unusual readings for the past 6 hours. At first, the computer systems had dismissed them as background radiation, or perhaps debris from an old comet. But the patterns were too regular, too organized, and they were getting stronger. Daeho had been working the night shift at Luna Station for 3 years. Most of that time involved watching empty screens and drinking coffee that tasted like recycled water, which it basically was. The United Earth Defense Force had built these monitoring stations after the resource wars of 2089, when humanity finally realized that fighting over Earth's diminishing supplies was less productive than looking outward to space. The stations were supposed to watch for asteroids, space debris, and the theoretical possibility of contact with alien intelligence. The theoretical had just become very real. Computer, run full spectrum analysis on contact group 77 Alpha, Daeho said while pulling up additional sensor data. The readings that came back made him check his coffee to see if someone had added something stronger than caffeine. 200 ships. Each one was easily 5 times larger than Earth's biggest space vessels. They were traveling in perfect formation at speeds that current human technology could not achieve. They had appeared at the edge of the solar system as if they had simply materialized from nothing, which suggested some kind of faster-than-light travel capability that Earth's scientists said was impossible. Daeho reached for the red communication button that he had hoped never to press. Luna Station to Earth Defense Command. Priority Alpha alert. We have contact. Repeat. We have contact. The response was immediate. Earth Defense Command here. Confirm your last transmission, Luna Station. Sir, we have 200 unknown vessels at the edge of the solar system. They are large, organized, and using technology beyond our current capabilities. Based on their current trajectory and speed, they will reach Earth orbit in approximately 72 hours. There was a long pause before the next transmission. Luna Station, this is Admiral Una Park. Transfer all sensor data immediately and maintain continuous monitoring. Do not, repeat, do not, attempt any form of communication with the unknown vessels. Admiral Una Park stood in the command center of Earth Defense Headquarters, built deep beneath the mountains of Korea. Around her, dozens of technicians were pulling up displays and running calculations. The defense systems that Earth had built were designed to handle human threats. Rogue nations with nuclear weapons, terrorist groups with stolen military hardware, and the occasional asteroid that wandered too close to inhabited areas. They were not designed to handle alien invasion fleets. Give me options, Yuna said to her senior staff. And please tell me someone has been reading too much science fiction. Colonel Tai-Hyun Jang, the head of strategic planning, looked up from his displays. Admiral, the sensor data is confirmed. 200 vessels. Unknown configuration using propulsion technology that our physicists say violates several laws of physics. Based on their size and formation, this appears to be a military force. Defensive capabilities? Yuna asked. We have 47 combat-capable vessels in various stages of readiness. Our ground-based defense systems can engage targets in low orbit. Beyond that, Taehyun shrugged in a way that said everything without saying anything. Dr. Min-Ho Lee, the chief military psychologist, had been quietly reviewing the tactical data. Admiral, may I suggest that our response to this situation should consider factors beyond simple military mathematics? Yuna turned to him. Explain. Any species capable of faster-than-light travel and organizing fleets of this size has clearly mastered technologies we do not possess. If they wanted to destroy Earth from a distance, they could probably do so without ever entering our defensive range. The fact that they are approaching suggests they want something from us, not simply our destruction. That's either very good news or very bad news, Yuna said. Perhaps both, Minho replied. As the alien fleet continued its approach, both sides prepared for humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. The Valkyrie ran their standard pre-conquest protocols, scanning for military installations, mapping population centers, and preparing surrender demands in the target species' primary languages. Their computers had decoded human communication systems within hours and identified the major power structures. The humans ran very different preparations. Emergency sessions of the United Earth Council activated protocols that had been theoretical exercises just days before. Military forces across the globe went to maximum alert status. Deep space monitoring stations tracked every movement of the approaching fleet. Most importantly, communication specialists prepared humanity's response to whatever demands the aliens might make. Dr. Min-Ho Lee worked with a team of linguists, anthropologists, and military strategists to develop first contact protocols. We need to remember that everything we do in the next few days will establish the relationship between our species and theirs, he told the team. Our response will tell them who we are and what they can expect from us. When the Valkyrie fleet reached the outer edge of Earth's solar system, Commander Hayek transmitted the standard surrender demand on all human communication frequencies. The message was simple and direct. Primitive inhabitants of the third planet, you are now subjects of the Valkyrie Empire. Cease all military activities and prepare for integration into our civilization. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species. The message was received at monitoring stations across Earth within minutes. Translation systems quickly decoded the alien language and distributed the message to government leaders worldwide. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session while military commanders waited for orders. Admiral Yuna Park read the message 3 times before making her decision. She had spent 30 years in the military, rising through the ranks during the resource wars and the rebuilding that followed. She had seen humanity at its worst and at its best. She knew that humans did not respond well to ultimatums, especially from strangers who had not bothered to introduce themselves politely. The response that went back to the Valkyrie fleet was crafted carefully by the best diplomatic and military minds on Earth. It was transmitted on the same frequency the aliens had used, ensuring they would receive it clearly. To the representatives of the Valkyrie Empire, Earth acknowledges receipt of your message. We appreciate your interest in our planet and people. However, we must respectfully decline your generous offer of integration. We are quite fond of managing our own affairs. Please enjoy your visit to our solar system and let us know if you require any assistance with navigation or supplies. Commander Hayek read the human response twice before calling his tactical officers to the bridge. In 200 years of Valkyrie expansion, no species had ever responded to a surrender demand with what appeared to be polite sarcasm. The response was so unexpected that the Valkyrie computers had no protocol for processing it. The war that would change both species forever was about to begin. The first Valkyrie bombardment began exactly 72 hours after their initial surrender demand. Commander Hayek had expected the humans to reconsider their position during that time, perhaps sending desperate messages begging for mercy or attempting to negotiate better terms. Instead, the monitoring systems detected frantic activity across the human planet as entire populations seemed to be moving away from major cities and military installations. The Valkyrie had studied human behavior during their approach, analyzing thousands of hours of intercepted communications and entertainment broadcasts. Humans appeared to value their urban centers greatly, building massive structures that served no obvious military purpose. They gathered in enormous numbers in these cities, creating what military theorists called high-value targets. The logical strategy was to threaten these population centers until the humans accepted Valkyrie authority. The orbital bombardment platforms targeted 12 major military installations across Earth. Each strike was precisely calculated to destroy the target while minimizing civilian casualties. The Valkyrie Empire prided itself on efficient conquest, not mindless destruction. After all, dead subjects provided no labor or resources. The first surprise came when the bombardment struck its targets. Instead of the desperate communications and surrender offers that typically followed such demonstrations, the Valkyrie intercepted what could only be described as human commentary on their own destruction. "Well, there goes the Pacific Fleet headquarters," came one transmission. "Good thing we moved everything out yesterday." "The orbital strike on Moscow was pretty impressive," said another voice. "Did you see that light show? Someone should get video for the archives." "Beijing command is gone, too," reported a third voice. "Right on schedule, these aliens are nothing if not punctual." The Valkyrie officers listening to these transmissions exchanged confused glances. The humans sounded almost appreciative of the bombardment, as if they were watching some form of entertainment rather than experiencing military defeat. Admiral Una Park stood in the backup command center that had been hastily constructed in an abandoned subway system beneath Seoul. Around her, dozens of technicians monitored communications and tracked the movement of Valkyrie forces. The orbital bombardment had destroyed exactly what they had expected it to destroy: empty buildings and abandoned equipment. "Phase 1 complete," she announced to her staff. "All primary installations successfully evacuated. Military assets relocated to secondary positions. Civilian populations at 97% evacuation success." Colonel Taehyun Jang looked up from his tactical display. "Valkyrie ground forces are beginning to deploy. First wave appears to be heading for Seoul, London, and New York. Standard. Occupation pattern." "Perfect," Una said. "Signal all ground units to begin Phase 2. The Valkyrie ground forces descended toward Earth in transport ships that could carry 1,000 soldiers each. Their intelligence indicated that human cities were centers of government, industry, and population. Securing these locations would effectively control the entire species. The first landing sites were carefully chosen for maximum strategic impact. Sergeant Ji-ho-nam crouched in the ruins of what had once been Seoul's financial district, watching through his scope as alien transport ships settled into the empty streets. His unit had been waiting in position for 6 hours, hidden in buildings that looked damaged from the orbital bombardment, but were actually carefully prepared defensive positions. The Valkyrie soldiers that emerged from their transports were impressive specimens. Each stood nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and chitinous armor that seemed to be part of their natural biology. They moved with military precision, securing landing zones and establishing perimeters exactly as human forces might do in similar circumstances. What they did not expect was for the city itself to fight back. The first indication that something was wrong came when a Valkyrie patrol entered what appeared to be an abandoned shopping center. Motion sensors triggered a sequence of events that had been planned months in advance. Speakers hidden throughout the building began broadcasting at maximum volume, a mixture of human death metal music, air raid sirens, and recorded screams from human horror movies. The psychological effect on the Valkyrie was immediate and devastating. Their species had evolved on a world where sound was primarily used for communication and harmony. The cacophony of human noise was not just loud, it was actively painful to their auditory systems. More importantly, it interfered with their ability to communicate with each other using their natural tonal language. As the disoriented Valkyrie soldiers stumbled through the shopping center, the building's automated systems activated the second phase of the trap. Emergency sprinkler systems flooded the floors with a mixture of water and industrial lubricants, making movement treacherous. At the same time, every television screen, computer monitor, and electronic display in the building began flashing, strobe lights at frequencies designed to cause disorientation in most known forms of biological vision. The third phase was the most disturbing. Hidden speakers began broadcasting what humans called psychological warfare audio, recordings of human children singing nursery rhymes, but slowed down and distorted until they sounded like the voices of the dead. The Valkyrie soldiers, who had no cultural context for understanding human childhood or the concept of innocent songs being twisted into something sinister, could only interpret these sounds as some form of supernatural threat. By the time the Valkyrie patrol managed to escape the shopping center, 3 of their soldiers were catatonic and the rest were showing signs of severe stress. Similar scenes were playing out across every major city on Earth, as humans demonstrated that they had turned their entire civilization into a weapon. Lieutenant Suman Cho had volunteered for what might have been a suicide mission, allowing herself to be captured by Valkyrie forces so she could provide them with carefully selected information about human capabilities. She sat in an alien holding cell, calmly answering questions from Valkyrie interrogators who seemed increasingly disturbed by her responses. "Your species engages in organized violence for entertainment?" asked the lead interrogator, whose name she had learned was Sub-Commander Vex. "Oh yes," Suman replied cheerfully. "We call them sports. We also create fictional stories about violence for entertainment. Movies, books, games. Some of our most popular entertainment involves humans fighting aliens, actually. You might enjoy some of them." "You create fictional scenarios about warfare with other species?" "Thousands of them. We've been imagining alien invasions for over a century. We've worked out dozens of different ways you might attack us and hundreds of ways we might respond. This invasion is actually pretty standard compared to some of the scenarios we've imagined." The Valkyrie interrogator made notes in what Suman assumed was his own language. "These fictional scenarios, do they influence your military planning?" "Absolutely. Some of our best military strategists got their start playing war games and reading science fiction. We've been preparing for this conversation for decades." What Suman did not tell her captors was that human military planners had indeed spent considerable time studying fictional alien invasions. The consensus among strategists was that any species capable of interstellar travel would have overwhelming technological advantages, making conventional resistance futile. The solution was to make conquest so psychologically traumatic that the invaders would prefer to leave rather than continue fighting. Major Sungwon Ko led a special operations team through the subway tunnels beneath London, heading toward a Valkyrie command post that had been established in what used to be Parliament. His mission was not to destroy the installation or capture alien technology, but to provide the Valkyrie with an unforgettable lesson about human nature. The tunnel system beneath London was perfect for human operations. Humans had built it originally for transportation, but generations of children had played in these tunnels, homeless populations had lived in them, and urban explorers had mapped every passage. The Valkyrie saw only a primitive transportation network. Humans saw a 3-dimensional battlefield where every advantage belonged to the defenders. Sungwon's team emerged from a maintenance shaft directly beneath the Valkyrie command post. Using cutting tools that were designed for construction work but functioned perfectly well for military sabotage, they carved a small hole in the floor above them. Through this hole, they introduced a package that would change the course of the war. The package contained 3 items: a small speaker, a projector, and a collection of human war films that had been carefully selected for maximum psychological impact. The speaker began broadcasting audio from the films at a volume just loud enough to be heard throughout the command post. The projector cast images onto the walls, scenes of human soldiers in combat, displaying the casual brutality and dark humor that characterized human warfare. The Valkyrie officers in the command post found themselves watching human soldiers joke, while under fire, laugh at their own injuries and maintain morale through situations that should have broken any rational mind. More disturbing was the apparent enjoyment humans showed while engaging in combat. Where Velkhari soldiers fought, with grim efficiency toward specific objectives, 3 weeks into what should have been a 48-hour conquest, Commander Hayek found himself facing a problem that no Velkhari military manual had ever addressed. His ground forces were requesting medical evacuation not for physical injuries, but for what their medics could only describe as combat-related psychological dysfunction. The reports made no sense according to established Velkhari understanding of warfare. Soldiers who had never been physically harmed were refusing to leave their transport ships. Veterans of multiple successful conquests were experiencing what humans would recognize as panic attacks when ordered to patrol human cities. Most disturbing of all, several units had reported auditory hallucinations consisting of human laughter and music when no humans were present. Dr. Kethral Vox, the chief psychologist of the Velkhari fleet, had never encountered anything like the symptoms being reported by returning soldiers. The Velkhari had eliminated most forms of mental illness from their species through genetic modification centuries before they began their expansion across the galaxy. Their society had been carefully structured to minimize psychological stress and maximize social harmony. "Commander," Dr. Vox reported during the daily briefing, "I must recommend a temporary suspension of ground operations until we can understand what is happening to our forces." Hayek studied the psychological reports with growing frustration. "Our soldiers are the finest warriors in the Empire. They have conquered 17 different species without suffering these symptoms. What makes these humans different?" "That appears to be the central question," Dr. Vox replied. "From a purely military perspective, we are winning every engagement. Human resistance is ineffective against our technology and tactics. Yet our soldiers are returning from successful missions, displaying symptoms I can only compare to severe trauma." The breakthrough in understanding came when Dr. Vox interviewed Sergeant Zach Moore, a veteran soldier who had participated in 6 previous conquests. Zach Moore had led a successful raid on a human supply depot, completing his mission with 0 casualties and capturing significant intelligence. By every military standard, the operation had been a perfect success. "The building was empty when we entered," Zach Moore explained. "Standard human evacuation pattern. We secured the perimeter and began cataloging supplies for requisition. Everything proceeded according to protocol." "What happened next?" Dr. Vox asked. "The humans began their psychological assault. They played sounds over the building's communication system. Not music, not communication, just noise. Random sounds mixed with human voices saying things that made no sense. Then the visual displays activated." "Describe these displays." Zach Moore's forearms trembled slightly as he recalled the experience. Images of humans engaged in various activities. Some appeared to be engaged in recreational violence. Others showed humans consuming other creatures while making expressions of satisfaction. Most disturbing were the images of young humans engaged in competitive activities that simulated warfare. Dr. Vox made careful notes. "These images caused you distress?" "The humans were enjoying themselves," Zach Moore said. "In every image, regardless of the violence or disturbing content, the humans appeared to be experiencing positive emotions. They were happy while engaged in activities that should have caused revulsion or fear." This revelation led Dr. Vox to request complete psychological profiles of human behavior from the Intelligence Division. What he discovered challenged every assumption the Velkhari had made about sentient species and the nature of civilization itself. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters on a world where nearly everything was trying to kill them. Their response to this evolutionary pressure had been to develop psychological mechanisms that allowed them to find enjoyment in dangerous situations. They had turned survival into entertainment, competition into recreation, and warfare into art. More disturbing from a Velkhari perspective was the discovery that humans actively sought out dangerous and stressful situations for pleasure. They created elaborate scenarios to frighten themselves for entertainment. They engaged in physical competitions that frequently resulted in injury. They consumed chemical substances that altered their mental state in ways that would be considered pathological in any other species. Major Seungwon Ko had been promoted, to Colonel after his successful psychological operations in London. His new mission was to establish contact with isolated Valkyrie units and provide them with educational materials about human culture. The goal was not to destroy or capture alien forces, but to ensure they received a complete education about what they were fighting. Seungwan's team had identified a Valkyrie observation post established in the ruins of the Sydney Opera House. Rather than attacking the position, they set up speakers around the building and began broadcasting what they called cultural orientation programming directly to the alien forces inside. The programming began with human music, starting with classical compositions and gradually progressing through jazz, rock, metal, and electronic music. Each musical style was accompanied by historical context explaining how humans had developed different forms of artistic expression in response to various social and military pressures. The Valkyrie soldiers listening to this programming learned that humans had created musical compositions to commemorate battles, celebrate victories, mourn defeats, and inspire troops heading into combat. Music was not simply entertainment for humans. It was a weapon of psychological warfare that they used against their own emotions and the emotions of their enemies. Following the musical education, Seungwan's team began broadcasting excerpts from human literature, focusing on works that dealt with warfare, survival, and the human response to impossible odds. The aliens learned about human concepts like gallows, humor, the tendency to make jokes in desperate situations, and esprit de corps, the way human military units developed emotional bonds that actually increased their effectiveness in combat. The final phase of the cultural education involved showing the Valkyrie soldiers human sports and recreational activities. They watched humans engage in boxing, wrestling, and martial arts for entertainment. They observed humans jumping from aircraft for pleasure, racing vehicles at dangerous speeds for competition, and deliberately frightening themselves with fictional scenarios for amusement. Captain Dae-ho Kim had been reassigned from Luna Station to Earth Defense Command, where he worked with a team of analysts trying to understand Valkyrie psychology and predict their next moves. The aliens had superior technology and overwhelming numerical advantages, but they seemed increasingly reluctant to use these advantages effectively. "They're adapting their tactics," Dae-ho reported during the morning briefing. "Valkyrie forces are avoiding close contact with human populations. They're conducting operations from a distance and minimizing exposure to human cultural materials." Admiral Yuna Park reviewed the tactical reports with satisfaction. "How are their casualty rates?" "Physical casualties remain minimal," Dae-ho replied. "Psychological casualties are approaching 30% of their ground forces. Medical evacuations to their fleet have increased by 400% over the past week." Dr. Min-ho Lee had been working with a team of xenopsychologists to develop more effective methods of psychological warfare against the Valkyrie. His research had identified the fundamental difference between human and Valkyrie approaches to conflict resolution. The Valkyrie eliminated internal conflict from their society before they began expanding into space. Min-ho explained to the command staff. They achieved unity through genetic modification and social conditioning. As a result, they have no psychological defense mechanisms for dealing with chaotic or irrational opposition. "Meaning?" Admiral Yuna asked. "Meaning they expect their enemies to behave logically. When faced with superior force, a rational enemy will either surrender or retreat. When offered terms for surrender, a rational enemy will negotiate. When defeated in battle, a rational enemy will accept defeat. We are not behaving rationally by their standards. And that's causing psychological damage. Severe psychological damage. Their minds are not equipped to process an enemy that treats warfare as entertainment, finds humor in desperate situations, and continues fighting despite having no chance of victory. From their perspective, we are exhibiting signs of species-wide psychological dysfunction." The psychological warfare campaign reached a new level when Colonel Taehyun Jang's forces captured an intact Valkyrie battleship using tactics that would have been considered impossible by conventional military standards. The operation became known as the Zombie Gambit and would be studied by human military academies for generations. The plan began when human forces allowed themselves to be killed in full view of Valkyrie observation posts. The bodies were left in positions where alien forces would be required to examine them when securing the area. What the Velkari did not know was that human medics had developed a chemical compound that could simulate death so perfectly that even advanced alien medical scanners could not detect signs of life. When Velkari forces boarded what they believed was a derelict human vessel filled with corpses, they followed standard procedures for examining alien technology and recovering useful materials. 6 months after the invasion began, the Velkari Empire faced something that had never occurred in their 200-year expansion across the galaxy. Entire military units were refusing deployment orders. Medical ships were operating at maximum capacity, evacuating soldiers who showed no physical injuries but could no longer function as military personnel. Most shocking of all, some Velkari soldiers had begun requesting asylum on Earth rather than return to their fleet. Commander Hayok stood in his command chamber staring at reports that made no sense according to any military doctrine he had ever studied. His invasion force had grown from 200 ships to over 400, as the Empire sent reinforcements to deal with what should have been a simple conquest. Yet despite this overwhelming advantage, the conquest of Earth seemed further away than ever. The humans had done something that defied every principle of rational warfare. Instead of trying to match Velkari military strength, they had focused entirely on making the war so psychologically devastating that the aliens would prefer to leave rather than continue fighting. It was working with terrifying effectiveness. Dr. Kethril Vox had requested an emergency meeting with all senior command staff. His medical facilities were overwhelmed with cases that Velkari medicine had no procedures for treating. Soldiers who had never been injured were experiencing crippling anxiety. Veterans of multiple successful conquests were having nightmares about human laughter. Some personnel had developed what humans would recognize as agoraphobia, becoming unable to leave their ships without experiencing panic attacks. "The situation is unprecedented," Dr. Vox reported to the assembled officers. "We are dealing with a form of warfare that attacks the fundamental assumptions our psychology is built upon. Our soldiers expect enemies to behave rationally. They expect warfare to follow logical patterns with clear objectives and achievable victory conditions. The humans have weaponized irrationality itself." Subcommander Vex, recently returned from a prisoner exchange operation, provided additional disturbing intelligence. "The humans are not attempting to defeat us militarily. They are attempting to educate us about their species in ways that make continued conflict psychologically impossible." The prisoner exchange had been unlike any military operation in Velkari history. Captain Sungjin Park had requested a meeting under a flag of truce, but instead of negotiating military terms, he had invited the Velkari commanders to what humans called a dinner party. The meal itself had been psychologically devastating to the aliens. Humans consumed dead organic matter for sustenance, but they had turned this biological necessity into an elaborate social ritual. They gathered around tables, engaged in recreational conversation, and seemed to find genuine pleasure in the consumption process. More disturbing was the casual way humans discussed violence during the meal. Captain Sungjin had cheerfully described human military history while serving foods that bore suspicious resemblances to sentient creatures. He had explained concepts like scorched earth tactics and total war, while cutting meat with implements that looked suspiciously like weapons. "The humans wanted us to understand their relationship with violence," Subcommander Vex explained to the command staff. "They do not see warfare as an unfortunate necessity or a tool for achieving political objectives. They see it as a natural expression of their species' fundamental nature." During the dinner, Captain Sungjin had shown the Velkari officers human entertainment that involved recreational violence. They watched humans engage in boxing matches where the objective was to render opponents unconscious for the amusement of spectators. They observed American football, a sport that appeared to involve ritualized warfare conducted for entertainment purposes. Most unsettling was human comedy, where individuals stood before audiences and made humorous observations about death, violence, and various forms of suffering. The humans in the audience responded to these observations with laughter, indicating that they found amusement in concepts that should have caused distress. "They wanted us to know what we were fighting," Vex continued. "Not a civilization that happened to be good at warfare, but a species that had evolved warfare as a form of entertainment. They fight for the same reason they play games or watch movies, because they enjoy the experience. Meanwhile, on Earth, human forces had begun the final phase of their psychological warfare campaign. Major Seungwon Ko, now promoted to general, oversaw what military historians would later call the Revelation Protocol. The objective was not to defeat the Velkhari militarily, but to provide them with such complete knowledge of human nature that they would never consider fighting humans again. Human forces had identified every Velkhari position on Earth and begun systematically exposing alien personnel to comprehensive educational programs about human civilization. These programs covered human history, culture, psychology, and most importantly, the human relationship with conflict and violence. The Velkhari learned about human recreational activities that involved deliberate exposure to danger for entertainment purposes. They discovered that humans regularly engaged in activities like skydiving, mountain climbing, deep-sea diving, and extreme sports that served no survival function except to provide excitement through risk-taking. They studied human fiction and learned that humans created elaborate stories about surviving impossible situations, fighting overwhelming odds, and finding victory through unconventional methods. More disturbing was the discovery that these stories were considered entertainment rather than training materials. The aliens were introduced to human concepts like adrenaline junkies, individuals who actively sought dangerous situations because they enjoyed the physiological and psychological effects of extreme stress. They learned about human military units that volunteered for the most dangerous missions, specifically because those missions provided the greatest challenges. General Taehyun Jang led a special operation designed to demonstrate the depth of human tactical creativity. His forces had identified a major Velkhari command center, established in what had once been the Pentagon. Rather than attacking the installation conventionally, they implemented what became known as the Funhouse strategy. Human forces transformed the entire area around the Pentagon into an elaborate maze filled with psychological challenges designed to test and educate Velkhari personnel. Alien soldiers attempting to reach their command center found themselves navigating through environments that constantly shifted between familiar and alien, logical and chaotic, threatening and amusing. The maze included chambers where Velkhari soldiers experienced human virtual reality simulations of historical battles, allowing them to witness human tactical thinking from the perspective of human commanders. They observed how humans had developed strategies for fighting enemies with superior technology, numbers, or resources. Other sections of the maze exposed alien personnel to human cultural artifacts that demonstrated the relationship between human creativity and violence. They saw weapons that had been turned into art objects, violent competitions that had become cultural celebrations, and military technologies that had been adapted for recreational use. The final chamber of the maze contained what humans called the Archive of Human Conflict. This was a comprehensive database of every war, battle, siege, and military engagement in recorded human history. Velkhari soldiers could access detailed accounts of how humans had fought each other for thousands of years, developing increasingly sophisticated methods of organized violence. The psychological impact of discovering that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history in constant warfare was devastating to Velkhari personnel. The aliens realized they were not fighting a peaceful species that had been forced into conflict, but a species that had achieved technological advancement, specifically to make warfare more effective. Dr. Minho Lee had been working with captured Velkhari personnel to understand the psychological mechanisms that made them vulnerable to human warfare tactics. His research revealed fundamental differences in how the two species processed stress, uncertainty, and conflict. The Velkhari eliminated psychological diversity from their population centuries ago, Minho explained in his report to Earth Defense Command. They achieved social harmony by ensuring that all individuals responded to situations in predictable, rational ways. This makes them incredibly efficient at tasks that require coordination and logical thinking, but it also makes them completely unable to process chaotic or irrational situations, Admiral Una Park observed. Exactly. When they encounter an enemy that does not behave according to logical patterns, their psychological defense mechanisms simply shut down. They have no experience dealing with opponents who find humor in desperate situations, maintain morale despite impossible odds, or treat warfare as entertainment. The research revealed that Valkyrie society had been structured to eliminate the psychological traits that humans considered essential for survival. They had no concept of gallows humor, the human tendency to make jokes in desperate situations. They could not understand fighting spirit, the human ability to maintain effectiveness despite facing certain defeat. Most importantly, they had no psychological mechanisms for dealing with enemies who seemed to enjoy fighting, regardless of the outcome. The message that arrived at Earth Defense Command 7 months after the invasion began was unlike any communication in the history of galactic warfare. Commander Hayok, speaking for the Valkyrie Empire, formally requested medical assistance for the emergency evacuation of his forces due to what he could only describe as severe psychological casualties resulting from prolonged exposure to human warfare tactics. Admiral Una Park read the transmission 3 times before calling an emergency meeting of her senior staff. The message contained detailed medical reports describing the psychological state of Valkyrie forces, along with a formal request for safe passage to evacuate all alien personnel from Earth and its surrounding space. "They're not surrendering," Admiral Una observed. "They're requesting medical evacuation." Dr. Minho Lee reviewed the Valkyrie medical reports with professional interest. The symptoms described were immediately recognizable to any human military psychologist: post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorders, depression, and various forms of combat fatigue. What made the reports unusual was that the Valkyrie had developed these conditions without experiencing traditional combat trauma. "They're suffering from exposure to our culture," Minho explained to the command staff. "Simply learning about human nature has caused psychological damage equivalent to severe combat trauma. This is unprecedented in military medicine." General Tai-Hyun Jang had been monitoring Valkyrie positions across Earth and confirmed that alien forces were showing clear signs of psychological breakdown. Their military units are no longer conducting offensive operations. Most are remaining in defensive positions and avoiding contact with human populations. Some units have abandoned their posts entirely. The decision to grant the Valkyrie request for medical evacuation was not made for humanitarian reasons, though human leaders did feel genuine sympathy for the psychological suffering of alien soldiers. The decision was made because it served human strategic interests perfectly. Admiral Una authorized full cooperation with the Valkyrie evacuation, but with specific conditions that would ensure the aliens carried away complete knowledge of what they had encountered on Earth. Every departing Valkyrie soldier would receive comprehensive educational materials about human history, culture, and military capabilities. "We want to make sure they understand exactly what happened here," Una explained to her staff. "This evacuation will serve as a warning to any other species that might consider humans an easy target for conquest." The evacuation process itself became the final demonstration of human psychological warfare capabilities. Instead of simply allowing Valkyrie forces to depart, human military personnel actively assisted in the operation while providing continuous cultural education to alien troops. Captain Sungjin Park led a team of human volunteers who helped Valkyrie soldiers overcome their psychological symptoms enough to function during the evacuation. The treatment involved what humans called exposure therapy, gradually reintroducing alien personnel to aspects of human culture in controlled doses. The therapy sessions were simultaneously medical treatment and cultural indoctrination. Valkyrie soldiers learned about human resilience mechanisms, the role of humor in managing stress, and the way humans had developed psychological tools for surviving in hostile environments. More importantly, they gained understanding of why humans found warfare psychologically rewarding rather than traumatic. "Your species evolved to enjoy conflict," Captain Sungjin explained to a group of Valkyrie soldiers during one therapy session. "We developed psychological mechanisms that allow us to find pleasure in dangerous situations because those mechanisms helped our ancestors survive. Warfare is not traumatic for us because we are designed by evolution to thrive in chaotic and violent environments." The Valkyrie soldiers listened to these explanations with the horrified fascination of individuals discovering that they had attempted to fight a natural disaster rather than a conventional enemy. They began to understand that humans did not simply happen to be good at warfare. They were psychologically constructed to excel at it. Dr. Kethriel Vox worked closely with human medical personnel to develop treatment protocols for Velkhari psychological casualties. The collaboration provided both species with valuable insights into the fundamental differences between their mental architectures. Human psychology is built around uncertainty and adaptation, Dr. Vox reported to his Velkhari colleagues. They do not require predictable environments or logical situations to maintain psychological stability. In fact, they seem to function better when facing challenges that have no clear solutions. Their entire civilization is organized around the principle that existence is inherently chaotic and potentially hostile, he continued. They have developed cultural mechanisms that turn this assumption into a source of strength rather than weakness. They expect life to be dangerous and difficult so they are not psychologically damaged when it proves to be exactly that. The human medical teams, led by Dr. Minho Lee, gained equally valuable insights into Velkhari psychology. They learned that the aliens had achieved social harmony by eliminating the psychological diversity that humans considered essential for survival. The Velkhari created a perfect society by ensuring that every individual responded to situations in predictable and rational ways. Dr. Minho explained in his final report. This eliminated conflict, but it also eliminated their ability to adapt to truly unexpected situations. They had never encountered an enemy that operated outside the boundaries of rational behavior. Colonel Dae-ho Kim supervised the technical aspects of the Velkhari evacuation, ensuring that alien forces departed with complete databases of human knowledge. Every transport ship received comprehensive archives of human history, literature, art, and military doctrine. The archives included detailed analyses of human military campaigns throughout history, with special emphasis on situations where humans had defeated technologically superior enemies through unconventional tactics. The Velkhari would return to their empire with complete knowledge of human strategic thinking and tactical creativity. More importantly, the archives included extensive documentation of human psychological resilience mechanisms. The aliens would understand how humans had developed cultural tools for maintaining morale and effectiveness in situations that should cause rational beings to surrender immediately. We want them to take this knowledge back to their empire, Admiral Yuna explained. Every species in their confederation should understand what happens when you try to conquer humans. This will serve as both education and warning. The final phase of the evacuation involved what humans called exit interviews with departing Velkhari personnel. These sessions were designed to ensure that alien soldiers understood the lessons they were supposed to carry back to their civilization. Lieutenant Sumin Cho, who had volunteered for capture early in the war, conducted many of these interviews. Her questions focused on ensuring that Velkhari soldiers understood the fundamental difference between their species and humanity. "What will you tell your leaders about Earth?" she asked one departing Velkhari officer. "I will tell them that humans are not a primitive species that happen to develop effective military technology," the officer replied. "I will tell them that humans are a species that evolved warfare as a natural psychological function. Fighting is not something you do when necessary. It is something you enjoy as recreation. And what will you recommend regarding future contact with human space?" "I will recommend that human territory be declared forbidden to all Velkhari personnel. Contact with your species causes psychological damage that our medical science cannot treat effectively." Similar conversations took place throughout the evacuation process. Velkhari soldiers consistently described their experience on Earth as encountering a species so fundamentally different from known forms of intelligent life. The normal diplomatic or military protocols were useless. The evacuation took 6 weeks to complete. During that time, human forces maintained complete cooperation with Velkhari medical personnel, while ensuring that every departing alien carried comprehensive knowledge of human capabilities and intentions. As the last Velkhari transport ships departed Earth's atmosphere, they carried with them something unprecedented in the history of galactic conquest. A completely defeated invasion force that had never lost a major military engagement. The aliens had been defeated not by superior weapons or tactics, but by superior psychology. Commander Hyok transmitted a final message to Earth Defense Command as his fleet prepared to enter hyperspace for the journey back to Velkari territory. The message was brief and unprecedented in military history. To the leaders of Earth, the Velkari Empire formally acknowledges that your species represents a form of intelligent life that our civilization is not equipped to interact with safely. We will ensure that human space is marked as forbidden territory in all Imperial star charts. We request that you maintain your current territorial boundaries to prevent unintentional contact between our species. Admiral Yuna Park's response was equally brief and considerably more ominous. Message received and acknowledged. Please note that human territorial boundaries are subject to expansion as our civilization develops. We will provide advance notice of any significant changes to our sphere of influence.